So we've been in our government class. We've been talking about First Amendment, protection of expression all week, and especially how it applies to our students. And we are excited to hear your story and from your perspective. Not very often we get to talk to people directly involved in the studies we're doing. So I will turn it over to you then.
Okay, Jim, I wonder if we would want to go directly into question and answers, or if there's anything in particular you'd like me to talk about first, I'd be happy to. Either way.
Maybe give us some background on your case from your perspective to start off with.
Okay, well, I grew up in a family that was very involved in the civil rights movement of the 1960s. Our father was a Methodist minister, a preacher at the local church, and in a little town of Atlantic, Iowa, there was a swimming pool, and there was one black family in town, and they wouldn't permit the kids to swim in the swimming pool. And so my parents took up that issue and was asked to please leave the church. He was kicked out of his job. And so we moved to Des Moines. And at that point, my mother really wanted to make sure that that we kids had experiences with black friends. And so she made friends in the black community, and we did. We made friends with some black kids, and of course we invited them to church, to our dad's church there. And the second church also asked my dad to leave, and so that was very disappointing. He was very saddened by all of that, because he thought that his mission in life was to help, he'd say, bring the kingdom of heaven to earth. And he felt very frustrated. But at that point, a Quaker organization invited my dad to work for them, and he became the Peace Education Secretary for an 8-state Midwestern region that included Wisconsin, by the way. And his job then was to arrange symposia and lectures and discussion groups and so on to discuss world events, especially the Vietnam War, which was really starting to become a big deal back then. So anyway, we kids kind of grew up in that kind of an environment. And so by Thanksgiving time of 1965, the B-52 bombers had been bombing Vietnam for some time, since February. And it was really breaking the heart of the peace community. And so we decided to wear these black armbands to show that we didn't support the war, and that we wanted to raise the awareness of the war and what issues were really involved in the war. And so we decided as a group of students, I'd gone to Washington, D.C. with 3 other high school students that had kind of hitched a ride on a college student buses that were chartered to go to Washington, D.C. To participate in the big anti-war march in November of 1965. So as a high school student, I went on that bus trip. On the way back, there was a discussion on the chartered bus what we might do to continue to try to raise awareness about the war and to protest against the war. And we decided to wear these black armbands to mourn the deaths on both sides of the conflict, and in support of Robert Kennedy's call for a Christmas truce. And it was kind of controversial that we would mourn the deaths of the enemy soldiers too. Anyway, it was really a pretty kind of a mild protest, if you think about it. It was just a silent piece of black cloth, and what we were in favor, I mean, we were mourning death of people, and we were encouraging a Christmas truce. And if you just look at it objectively, those are pretty innocent things to want. But they took it as the anti-war movement in general was taken to be communist inspired and so on. And there was quite a it was quite a conflict between the I mean, it wasn't a physical contact until a few years later, but between the anti-war people and the pro-war people. But anyway, the school decided to ban the wearing of these armbands, and we decided to do it anyway. We tried to negotiate with the president of the school board, and he really wouldn't listen to us. And so at that point, we decided to wear the armbands anyway, and that was the beginning. And then the court trials happened, the federal district court in Des Moines, where we lost, and then we appealed to the appellate circuit court in St. Louis, and they split 4-4. So there had been some appellate court decisions that went both ways in regarding, one was regarding buttons, political buttons. They said 1 man, 1 vote. And they were being worn in Mississippi, and the kids had been kicked out of school for that. And they had taken it to court, and the court had sided with them. There was another case where the court sided with the school board. So anyway, the setup was pretty perfect for the Supreme Court deciding to hear our case and to clarify the matter once and for all. So anyway, that's the sketch. Kind of quick, but maybe if you would have questions, I'd be able to answer them.
We have questions? No?
What emotions were you feeling on the first day that you walked into your school wearing the armband?
I didn't hear the very first part of that question.
What emotions, what kind of feelings did you have walking in with the armbands?
It was a day filled with strong feelings, for sure. That day when I left the house, I had the armband in my pocket because I didn't want to walk to school on a public street. And I was sort of worried about, so I had it in my pocket. My dad said that you should wear that armband because the school authorities have their job to do, and they've made a decision, and I'm not so sure you should violate that decision. And I said, well, Dad, this is just a black piece of cloth. And in Vietnam, people are dying every day. And he said, well, then for you, it's a matter of conscience. I said, yes. And he said, well, then I support you. So that was before I even got started. So I walked to school without the armband. I went to orchestra rehearsal. I played the violin without the armband again. Went to homeroom still without the armband. And after homeroom, I went into the restroom to put on the armband, and I was struggling because it's a safety pin and you've only got one hand to work with. It was kind of difficult. And a kid came in and helped me put it on. I was wearing the armband then. I went through 2 classes with no comment at all. Nobody even said anything. I think one of my teachers noticed it, but decided not to make an issue out of it, even though it had been in the newspaper that they were not permitted. So my last class, gym, and when I got dressed after gym, I put on my white shirt. I had a white dress shirt, and I put the armband on right on the white shirt, and it's really stood out. Earlier, I had it on my suit coat, and it really didn't stand out that well. So I went to lunch wearing the armband like that, and I sat down at a table, and my friends were there. Some of them were concerned about me. Some of them were supportive of me. And a couple kids came over and started giving me a hard time, said I was a commie and stuff like that. And the football player came up and he said, look, you've got your opinion about the war. John has his opinion about the war. John has a right to his opinion. Leave him alone. And that was really unexpected and very cool to be, supported by a football player over a political opinion that a lot of people thought I really was a coward to take an opinion like that. anyway, that's about what happened. I got asked to go to the office. I talked to the principal for quite a while, most of an hour, and he was generally respectful of me. It was quite interesting. He had been a veteran of the Korean War, and he understood about freedom of speech and opinions. And at the same time, he thought that I was probably listening to the wrong people regarding the war, and that I may not completely understand my obligation to support the government during a time of war. And I also was firmly aware of my democratic duty to inform the democratic society about my opinion. And I had a duty, really, I felt, to say what I really thought. Anyway, we talked about that for quite a while, and at the end, he said, "Well, I'm going to ask you to take off the armband, and if you do, I'm not going to open a file on this. It'll be just like it didn't happen." He said, "But I don't think you're going to take it off, are you?" And I said, "No, I'm not." And he said, "Well, I'll call your dad and get a ride then, and you can come back. I'm not going to suspend you formally, because I'm not going to open any paperwork on it, but the school board the principals have decided not to allow the armbands, so I'm going to not let you be in school with that armband on. So go home." But he was nice to me. And so then I was out of school. We had, I think, 5 people out of school at that point, and including my sister, Mary Beth, and Chris Eckhart. And the 3 of us then sued. Our parents decided to sue the school board for violating our constitutional right, First Amendment rights. So that's how it all got started.
Do you think anything like this could happen today, or are our freedoms really well protected?
Would it happen today?
Yeah.
I think that among students, I don't want to speak for you, because you are the students and you know students better than I do these days, but students all over the country some of them have different issues, and some of them feel quite strongly about their issues. And so I think if students find ways to protest that are within the boundaries set by the Supreme Court, in our case, which is that a student speech cannot be materially and substantially disruptive to the educational process. But Abe Fortas, the justice who wrote the opinion in our case, also pointed out that we have to be able to tolerate minor disruptions in our society, because in a democratic society, we have different opinions, and it's important that we be able to talk to each other about them. And it's important that we not feel that we've had duct tape put over our mouth just because we have the wrong opinion. Now, he didn't use those words, but that's the point he made. And I totally and firmly believe that. So wherever, there was a student in Dearborn, Michigan, I'll say, back when George W. Bush was president, he wore a t-shirt that said, had a picture of George W. Bush, and then it said "International Terrorist" on it. And he got called to the office and talked to the principal, and the principal said, "You're going to have to go home or take off that t-shirt." And he said, "No, what about Tinker v. Des Moines?" And she said, "Well, what about Tinker v. Des Moines?" And she had a book, or she had something, and she opened it up and started reading to him from Black's descent in our case. In other words, she started reading to him from the losing side of the case. Now, that's an interesting thing for an educator to do for a student, is just basically misinform the student because they want the student to behave a certain way. But anyway, that is like, yes, students today will do protests, and they'll figure out ways to do protests that don't violate the ruling. And school boards will either accept that or they'll try to suppress it anyway. And by the way, a lot of school boards really do want their students to know what their rights are. And a lot of administrators and teachers also really want their students to know, because the society is a democratic society, and we all have to help make those decisions. And we can't do that if we can't express our opinions. So how the courts would rule today, I don't know. I happened to be at the Supreme Court for an evening session about 3 or 4 years ago. It was a lecture series that they sometimes present in that building in the evening, if there's a justice that will sponsor the lecture. So that evening, the sponsor of the lecture was Justice Alito, Samuel Alito, and I was sitting right next to him. And afterward, you know, we talked, and I said I was happy to see that during his confirmation hearings, he'd been asked about our case, and he had said, well, it's stare decisis, which is Latin for already decided. And I mentioned that to him that evening, and he said, yes, I hope your case stands for a long time. And that's strange, and it may sound strange because he's a conservative justice, and ours was considered a liberal case. But our case is used by people of every political persuasion, conservative, liberal, radical, anarchist, Christian, Boy Scouts, everything, in order to get access, say, to schoolrooms in the evening after school. Our case basically tells the schools they have to treat everyone equally in that regard, and they can't discriminate by the content of what's going on. So I think it's going to survive. I think our case is going to survive. But if it had to be determined again from fresh, I don't know what would happen with today's court. Long answer to a short question.
Do you think the court's findings, now it's almost 50 years, do you think the court's findings in Frazier, Hazelhurst, in those more recent cases has limited student speech from the Tinker decision's perspective? Do you think students have less protections now than they did 50 years ago?
They probably do. They probably do. In Frazier, excuse me a sec. I think the school has sort of defined the what kind of speech is considered to be disruptive to the educational environment. And in Frazier, his speech, are you all familiar with this case? If not, take a look at Matthew Frazier's speech. The court thought that the sexual innuendo in that speech was inappropriate for the educational environment, and I don't have a whole lot of conflict with that. I know Matt Frazier now, and he said, "Well, you were actually expressing an opinion, and I was telling a joke," and that's really true. My own view is that jokes should also be free speech. I mean, that we would be a richer society if we were free to tell our jokes to each other. But another case is the Bonghitz case. Am I running up time limit here?
No, we're fine.
You know the Frederick Morse case from Alaska. Joe Frederick held a sign up that said "Bonghitz for Jesus." Are you familiar with that case? The court ruled in that case that students cannot encourage illegal drug use, and if Joe Frederick had merely been expressing the opinion, legalized pot, that would have been okay. But since he was more or less encouraging, take bong hits, I mean, bong hits for Jesus, it's a little difficult to construe that as true encouragement. But anyway, that was the position that Kenneth Starr, have you heard that name before? Kenneth Starr was the prosecutor who prosecuted Bill Clinton for the Lewinsky issue. But he also argued for the school board in the Frederick v. Morse case. And he won that. I had a radio interview with Ken Starr later, and he assured me that he in general agreed with our case, but that in the very narrow situation of encouraging illicit drug use, that he was against that. So.
Other questions?
When you went to litigation, how involved were you and your family in the litigation? How were you treated as you were suing the, school board, community, all those kind of things?
Now, I didn't hear that very well. If someone closer to the microphone could repeat that.
Yeah. Basically, how involved were you, your family, once the ACLU took the case in the litigation process? And how were you and your family treated during that long legal process?
It was a mix. Well, first off, once the ACLU took the case, we really did not have a lot of involvement with it. We would just basically sign off on different decisions that they were making. Our family was treated a whole spectrum of different ways. Some people really thought it was great what we were doing, and some people thought it was just the worst thing they could imagine. Someone threw a brick through our car window. Somebody threw paint on our sidewalk. People called. Mary Beth answered the phone. My sister answered the phone. It might have been Christmas Day, and somebody said, "I'm going to kill you." A talk show host, a right-wing talk show host in Des Moines, named Russ Levine, offered to lend a gun. He also had a gun shop. He offered to lend a gun to anyone who would shoot my dad. So, I mean, it brought out the best and the worst from people. So it was a real mix.
More questions? Sure. A debate propped up in one of my classes yesterday about maybe how far the Tinker decision protects. For example, swastikas in the classroom and armband, similar clothing style, passive speech, but certainly a different connotation. Where do you think the protections might lie there, and how courts might find, I guess?
Boy, that's very tough, because this kind of speech is kind of borderline assault. It's like a verbal assault in a sense. If you're telling someone you hate them and you wish people like them would die, or people like them should not have rights, or so on, it's a very difficult situation. The court, the Ninth Circuit Court in San Francisco ruled against some students who had decided to wear American flag T-shirts to school on the Cinco de Mayo. If you don't know what that is, it's the 5th of May is a Mexican holiday. And in California, there are communities that have very large Latino populations. And so the non-Latino, some of them decided to wear American flag shirts to kind of try to provoke the kids with a Mexican heritage. And they were told by the school that they couldn't wear those T-shirts on that day. And so they took it to court. and they won at the, I believe they won at the district court, and then they lost at the circuit court. And the circuit court said, no, they shouldn't, the schools have the right to prohibit the wearing of American flag T-shirts. So my sister Mary Beth and I signed on to an amicus curiae brief, which is a kind of a formal letter to the court. And we were saying that those students should be allowed to wear that shirt, even though it offended some people. And in our opinion, it really didn't have to do with the fact that it was an American flag or not, just that that we felt that the schools should defend the right of the students to wear the symbol. Now, when this comes to swastikas and even Confederate flags, where there's it's such a message, I'm not sure where the boundary is on that. I would actually wish, if wishes meant much, I would wish that the culture could simply just withdraw that kind of provocation, that the culture could frown on the thing to the extent that it wouldn't have to be determined by the judicial system. But there you have it. I suspect that will be viewed as a more or less a form of assault, and that the kids will be considered, it'll be considered, kids need a place to have an education. Anyway.
All right.
It's confusing.
Other questions? I guess I would say in the day of social media, the internet, certainly things are a lot different. There's a lot more forms of speech now than there were previously. Maybe where does this decision, how does that affect online speech, social media speech, those kinds of issues that students face today?
These issues haven't been resolved. They're courts right now, and they're trying to find that out. What happens to a student is something at home that doesn't affect the school? Can the schools control that? It's a question right now, and our lower courts are hitting on both sides. Hey, well, I could leave. If you'd like to read news, this is commercial advertising of the presentation. I have a website, and it has 20,000 current news feeds. And if I could leave some of you with that URL, I'd be very happy. Anybody writing it? You come to class without Anyways, SCHEMA-ROOT.org. 20,000 feeds.
Schemaroot.org.
With a hyphen. Sorry about the hyphen. It's extra thumb travel on a mobile phone, but there it is.
I put it up on my board, so.
Thank you, Charlie.
Yeah. And then I guess finally, what advice do you have for students today in terms of, in general, but in terms of their First Amendment rights of making sure that their opinions and their political voices get heard today?
The number one thing I think I'd like to leave with you is to not feel despair that you're just one person in the giant sea of people. There's therefore nothing left. Because I know that a lot of them are very creative and intelligent people, and you work together with others who are creative and intelligent. And I really do have faith that we can solve the problems that we're facing. Take heart, keep track of what's going on in the world, form your opinions, and I guess if you feel afraid to say something, that's a sure sign that there's something wrong in the situation, in the context. If you're afraid to say something that you're really thinking, there's a different problem. And I hope you'll try to figure it out, because we all need to be not afraid to say what we really think. Anyway, that's my advice.
All right. Thank you very much for coming in today and speaking with them.
My pleasure. Thank you all.
All right. Have a great day. Thank you again.
Okay, you too. Anytime, Jim. Thanks.